The phone call that would turn my life upside down came on a Tuesday afternoon, just as I was finishing up a client meeting. I remember glancing at the caller ID, seeing it was Marty, the old caretaker my grandfather had hired decades ago to watch over the lakeside property. Marty never called unless something was wrong. "Alex, you need to get down here. Now." His voice was shaking, which wasn't like him at all. Marty was the steadiest person I knew. "There's people here, construction crews. They're marking boundaries, talking about clearing trees next week. They say they have permits." My stomach dropped. "What? That's impossible. I haven't authorized anything." "Well, somebody did. There's a fancy real estate woman here with papers saying the land's been sold. When I told her I work for you, she laughed and said I should talk to my new employers." I grabbed my keys before we even hung up. "I'm on my way." "Don't let them touch anything." The 200-acre lakeside property in question had been in my family for generations. My grandfather had purchased it back in the 1950s when the area was nothing but wilderness. Over the decades, as the surrounding region developed into a vacation hotspot, developers had repeatedly tried to buy him out. But Grandpa James was stubborn. He built a modest cabin on the land, taught me to fish in that lake, and made me promise I'd never sell it. When he passed away 3 years ago, he left everything to me, his only grandchild, much to the dismay of my mother and her husband, Richard. Mom had always had a strained relationship with her father, especially after she married Richard Bennett, a real estate developer with a reputation for cutting corners. Grandpa never trusted him. I had kept Marty on as caretaker, visiting the property monthly myself, and had been slowly making plans to build an eco-friendly retreat there, something small and sustainable that honored my grandfather's love for the land. But now, apparently, someone else had plans of their own. The 2-hour drive to the property felt like an eternity. When I finally turned down the long dirt road leading to the lake, my headlights caught a cluster of vehicles parked near the cabin. 2 large SUVs and a pickup truck that didn't belong there. The sight of surveyor stakes with bright orange tape scattered across the front field made my blood boil. I pulled up behind the vehicles just as the cabin door opened, spilling light onto the porch. 3 figures emerged. A woman in a sleek business suit despite the rural setting, and a couple I instantly recognized. Richard and my mother, Charlotte. "What the hell is going on here?" I demanded, slamming my car door harder than necessary. The woman in the suit stepped forward with a practiced smile. "Mr. Turner? I'm Valerie Kent with Lakeshore Luxury Properties. There seems to be some confusion with your caretaker. I was explaining to your parents that we're simply conducting preliminary work for the development. The sale hasn't fully closed yet, but we have a binding agreement in place." "These aren't my parents," I corrected her automatically. "That's my mother and stepfather, and there is no binding agreement because I haven't sold anything to anyone." Richard stepped forward with that condescending smile I'd grown to hate over the years. "Alex, let's talk inside, shall we? No need to make a scene." I spotted Marty standing by the cabin door, arms crossed, face grim. He gave me a small nod, confirming my suspicions. Something very wrong was happening. The cabin's interior was exactly as I'd left it a few weeks ago, though I noticed someone had been using it recently. Wine glasses sat in the sink, and a designer handbag was tossed on the sofa. My mother's, no doubt. "You need to call off whatever you think is happening here," I said, turning to face them. "I haven't authorized any sale." Richard sighed dramatically, exchanging a glance with my mother. "Alex, we've been trying to reach you about this for weeks. You know this land is being wasted just sitting here. Your grandfather was sentimental, but he didn't understand modern real estate values." "We did try to call," my mother added, not quite meeting my eyes. "But you've been so busy with your work, and this opportunity came up." "What opportunity?" I demanded. Valerie Kent stepped in smoothly. "Lakeshore Luxury is prepared to pay $4.2 million for this parcel. We're planning an exclusive resort community, 30 high-end homes, a golf course, private marina. The Bennett Group would be our development partner. That explained it. Richard's company would make millions on the construction contracts alone. I haven't signed anything, I said firmly, and I'm not going to. Richard's fake smile faded. Actually, the paperwork is already filed. The initial agreement has been signed. Not by me. By your power of attorney, he countered. The room seemed to tilt. I've never given anyone power of attorney. My mother finally spoke up. Honey, remember last Christmas when we helped you organize your grandfather's estate paperwork? There were so many documents to sign. The memory hit me like a truck. They had indeed helped me with paperwork, bringing stacks of documents, guiding my hand from signature line to signature line, while I was distracted with grief and the holiday chaos. I had trusted them. You tricked me into signing a power of attorney? My voice was barely a whisper. We did what was best for everyone, Richard said firmly. This land is worth millions, and you are going to let it sit here empty because of some misguided promise to an old man. I turned to the real estate agent. Ms. Kent, whatever documents you have are fraudulent. I never authorized this sale. Valerie's professional demeanor cracked slightly. Mr. Bennett assured us everything was in order. We've already put down earnest money and begun the development process. Then Mr. Bennett has committed fraud, and your company is about to be involved in a legal nightmare, I replied, pulling out my phone. I'm calling my lawyer right now. Richard's face darkened. Don't be dramatic, Alex. This is happening whether you like it or not. The documents are filed. Get off my property, I said, my voice shaking with anger. All of you, now! My mother stepped toward me, her eyes pleading. Alex, be reasonable. This money would set you up for life. Your grandfather wouldn't want you clinging to the past. Don't you dare tell me what he would want, I snapped. You barely spoke to him for the last decade of his life. The standoff might have continued indefinitely if Marty hadn't cleared his throat from the doorway. Sheriff Collins is on his way. Called him when I saw what was happening. Richard's face flushed with anger. You had no right? I work for Alex, Marty said simply. Always have. The next few hours were a blur. Sheriff Collins arrived, listened to both sides, and informed Richard, my mother, and Valerie Kent that they needed to cease activities until the ownership dispute was resolved. Ms. Kent left, looking distinctly unhappy, especially after I informed her that her company would be named in my lawsuit if they proceeded with any development based on fraudulent documents. My mother and Richard were more stubborn. As the sheriff escorted them to their car, Richard turned to me with cold eyes. You have no idea who you're messing with, he said. I have connections all over this county. By the time I'm done, you'll be begging me to take this worthless land off your hands. My mother wouldn't even look at me as they drove away. After they left, I sat on the porch with Marty, trying to process what had just happened. The night was quiet, except for the occasional splash from the lake and the chorus of frogs. Your grandpa always said your stepfather was a snake, Marty commented, passing me a mug of coffee. Guess he was right. I can't believe my own mother was part of this, Marty sighed. Money changes people, Alex, and your stepdad has been eyeing this property for years. Your granddad knew it. It's why he left it to you directly. I nodded, recalling conversations with my grandfather, where he had explicitly warned me about Richard's interest in the land. I had thought he was being paranoid. Now I realized he had understood the threat all too well. That night, I hardly slept. I called my lawyer, Daniel Prescott, and explained the situation. He was as outraged as I was, and promised to start emergency proceedings first thing in the morning to invalidate any fraudulent power of attorney and file injunctions against any development. "This is serious, Alex," Daniel warned me over the phone. "Fraud, potential forgery, misrepresentation. If what you're saying is true, your stepfather could be facing criminal charges, not just civil penalties." "I don't care," I said. "They tried to steal my grandfather's legacy." "It's going to get ugly. Family lawsuits always do." "They stopped being family the moment they did this," I replied. Daniel was right about it getting ugly. The next morning, I was awakened by the sound of heavy machinery. I rushed outside to find 2 bulldozers and a work crew at the property line, with Richard supervising. They had already knocked down a section of old-growth trees that my grandfather had cherished. "What the hell are you doing?" I shouted, running toward them. "This is trespassing," Richard smirked. "I have permits and a signed sales agreement. You're the one trespassing, Alex." I pulled out my phone and showed him the emergency injunction that Daniel had emailed over just hours earlier. "This says differently. Sheriff Collins already warned you yesterday." "Papers don't stop progress," Richard said dismissively. "By the time your little legal challenge works its way through the system, this project will be too far along to stop. That's how the real world works." I called Sheriff Collins again, but by the time he arrived, another acre of trees had been destroyed. The sheriff ordered the work crew to leave, but the damage was already done. Standing among the fallen trees, some over 100 years old, I felt a rage I'd never experienced before. Daniel arrived shortly after, surveying the destruction with grim determination. "We're upgrading the lawsuit," he said. "Willful destruction of property, defiance of a court order. Your stepfather just made a very expensive mistake." While we were talking, my phone rang. It was an unknown number that turned out to be a journalist from the local paper. Somehow, word had already gotten out about the dispute. Richard was nothing if not connected. "Mr. Turner, we understand there's a dispute over the lakefront property. Mr. Bennett has provided us with documentation showing he has legal authority to develop the land. Would you care to comment?" My first instinct was to refuse, but Daniel nudged me. "Tell your side. Public opinion matters in cases like this." So I did. I explained how my grandfather had left the property to me, how I believed my mother and stepfather had tricked me into signing documents, and how they had defied a court order to stop development. I emphasized my grandfather's environmental vision for the land and my plans to honor it. "And what about the economic benefits Mr. Bennett claims his development would bring to the county?" the journalist asked. "At what cost?" I countered. "Destroying one of the last untouched lakefront properties? Paving over wetlands? My grandfather protected this land for decades because he understood its value went beyond dollars." The article came out the next day, and to my surprise, it was largely sympathetic to my position. The journalist had done her homework, detailing Richard Bennett's history of controversial developments, including 2 previous projects that had resulted in environmental fines. She'd also found neighbors who valued the undeveloped land and wildlife sanctuary it provided. Richard was furious. He called me, shouting threats about libel lawsuits and ruining my reputation in the community. "You think you've won something here? I own half the planning board in this county. One newspaper article won't stop this development." "We'll see," I replied, hanging up on his tirade. What I didn't expect was for the situation to escalate into a full-blown community controversy. By the end of the week, local environmental groups had gotten involved, organizing a protest at the county offices against Richard's development plans. The lakefront property had apparently been home to several endangered bird species, making its preservation suddenly of interest to national conservation organizations. My mother called, her voice tight with anger. "What have you done, Alex? Richard is getting death threats. His investors are nervous. All because you couldn't be reasonable about a piece of land you barely even visit." "That's not true," I protested. "I love that land, and I didn't start this fight. You two did when you decided to forge my signature and sell something that wasn't yours to sell. We didn't forge anything. You signed the power of attorney. Under false pretenses, I reminded her. You knew exactly what you were doing. There was a long pause. Richard says he's going to countersue you for defamation. He says you'll lose everything. Is that a threat, Mom? Another pause. It's a reality check. You can't win against him. He has too much money, too many connections. Then I guess we'll find out. Justice can still win against money and connections, I said before ending the call. Daniel warned me that Richard was indeed preparing a countersuit, claiming I had verbally agreed to the sale and was now using technicalities to back out, damaging his business reputation in the process. But he also brought unexpected good news. The district attorney is interested in the case, he told me. Apparently, this isn't the first time Richard Bennett has been accused of document fraud. They've opened a preliminary investigation. Criminal charges. This was escalating beyond anything I had anticipated. Part of me wanted to back down, to find some compromise that would end the nightmare. But every time I thought about giving in, I remembered my grandfather's words. This land isn't just property, Alex. It's a promise to the future. 2 weeks into the legal battle, I received a call from a blocked number. When I answered, a man's voice I didn't recognize spoke. Mr. Turner, my name is Thomas Westfield. I used to work for your stepfather's company. Used to? I was fired 6 months ago for budget reasons, but really it was because I questioned some of his practices. I've been following your case in the news, and I have information that might help you. We agreed to meet at a coffee shop in a neighboring town. Thomas turned out to be a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a nervous demeanor. He kept glancing toward the door as if expecting someone to burst in. Bennett Construction has a playbook for these situations, he explained quietly. Richard targets properties he wants, finds leverage on the owners, and when that fails, he's not above creating documentation that never existed. I saw it happen at least 3 times while I worked for him. Did you report it? Thomas laughed bitterly. To whom? He has half the county officials in his pocket. The few times anyone has tried to stand up to him, they've been buried in legal fees or mysteriously found themselves facing unrelated problems, tax audits, permit issues for their businesses, that sort of thing. Why are you telling me this now? He pushed a folder across the table. Because what he did to you crosses a line, and because I kept records. Emails, memos, notes from meetings where he specifically discussed your grandfather's property and how to get it from you if he left it to you in his will. They were planning this for years, Mr. Turner. The folder contained printouts of emails dating back nearly 5 years, including several from around the time of my grandfather's death, discussing the Turner Lakefront acquisition and strategies for securing Turner's cooperation or proceeding without it. Most damning was an email from Richard to his company attorney. If Alex won't play ball, Charlotte says she can get him to sign the POA during the holiday confusion. He trusts her completely and never reads what he signs when she's involved. My own mother had been plotting this for years. The betrayal burned like acid. Why didn't you come forward sooner? I asked Thomas. Fear, he admitted. Richard Bennett destroys people who cross him, but seeing what he's doing to your family land, I couldn't stay silent. My father was a lot like your grandfather, believed in protecting the land, not exploiting it. I'd want someone to fight for his legacy, too. I had Daniel authenticate the documents immediately. They were real, and they were explosive. Evidence of a premeditated plan to defraud me of my inheritance. When we presented them to the district attorney, the criminal investigation shifted into high gear. What happened next unfolded with startling speed. Armed with Thomas's evidence, the DA obtained warrants to search Richard's office and home. They found not only more documents related to my property, but evidence of similar schemes involving other landowners. Richard was arrested on multiple charges of fraud, forgery, and conspiracy. The news hit the local media like a bombshell. "Prominent developer arrested in fraud scheme," the headlines proclaimed. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists, neighbors, distant relatives all wanting a statement or inside information. My mother showed up at my apartment the day after Richard's arrest, her eyes red from crying, looking older than I'd ever seen her. "They've frozen our accounts," she said without preamble. "The house, the cars, everything. They're saying I was part of a criminal conspiracy. My own son did this to me." "You did this to yourself," I corrected her. "You chose Richard and his schemes over your own family." "He told me you'd never know, that it was just paperwork, that you'd thank us when you had millions instead of a worthless piece of land." She collapsed onto my couch, sobbing. "He said no one would get hurt." I felt a complex mix of emotions: anger, pity, disappointment. People did get hurt. Those trees that were hundreds of years old, they're gone forever. The trust between us, also gone. "What am I supposed to do now?" she asked, her voice small. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But you're going to have to figure it out without me. You chose your side, Mom. I can't help you now." It was the hardest thing I'd ever said to her, but it was necessary. As she left, shoulders slumped in defeat, I felt no triumph, only sadness for what our relationship had become. The criminal case against Richard moved forward, with my mother eventually accepting a plea deal in exchange for testifying against him. She admitted to knowing about the fraudulent power of attorney, but claimed Richard had assured her it was merely a legal shortcut, not an actual crime. Whether that was true or simply her attempt to minimize her own culpability, I'll never know for certain. Richard, facing overwhelming evidence and abandoned by his former allies, also eventually took a plea deal rather than face a full trial. He was sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay $1.3 million in restitution to me and to other landowners he had defrauded over the years. The lawsuit against Lakeshore Luxury Properties also yielded results. Once they realized the extent of Richard's fraud and the evidence against him, they quickly settled, paying damages for the destruction already caused to the property and issuing a public apology. In the end, the legal settlement came to just over $2 million. Ironically, about half what they had offered to pay for the land originally. But the land remained mine, which was what mattered most to me. 1 year later, I stood on the porch of the newly renovated cabin, watching the sunset over the lake. Where Richard's bulldozers had cleared trees, I had worked with local conservation groups to plant new ones. Not the ancient giants that had been lost, but the beginning of the next generation of forest. Marty joined me, handing me a mug of coffee, a tradition we'd maintained through all the turmoil. "Your grandfather would be proud," he said, nodding toward the lake where a family of loons was gliding across the water. "Not just of saving the land, but of standing up for what's right." I nodded, thinking about everything that had happened. My mother was living in another state now, attempting to rebuild her life after the divorce and criminal proceedings. We spoke occasionally, stilted, careful conversations that might someday rebuild into something resembling a relationship, though never what we'd had before. Richard was serving his sentence, his reputation and business empire in ruins. The former allies who had once supported his projects now publicly disavowed any knowledge of his methods. Some faced investigations of their own. As for me, I had used part of the settlement money to establish a conservation trust for the property, ensuring it would remain protected even beyond my lifetime. The rest I had invested in sustainable development projects in the county, proving that economic growth and environmental protection weren't mutually exclusive. You know what's ironic? I said to Marty. If they had just asked me, I might have been willing to sell them a small portion of the land for reasonable, limited development, something that preserved the most important natural areas. It was their greed and deception that made compromise impossible. Marty nodded sagely. That's often the way. People get so focused on taking everything that they end up with nothing. We fell into comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky. In the distance, a whippoorwill called, the first one I'd heard on the property in years. Nature was resilient, I reflected. Given time and protection, it could recover from almost anything. The same, perhaps, was true of people. The betrayal still hurt, but I was healing. The land was healing, and in saving my grandfather's legacy, I had discovered something important about myself. I was stronger than I had ever realized. The legal battle had cost me my relationship with my mother and exposed ugly truths about human nature, but it had also shown me the power of standing firm against seemingly insurmountable opposition. Richard had been right about one thing. He did have money and connections, but in the end, truth and justice had prevailed. As darkness fell over the lake, I thought about future generations who would enjoy this unspoiled wilderness because one person had refused to be bullied or bought. Some things, I had learned, were worth fighting for, no matter the cost. This land was one of them. 6 months later, the grand opening of the James Turner Wildlife Sanctuary and Education Center drew a larger crowd than I expected. Local families, environmental activists, school groups, and even a few state politicians gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony at the entrance to what had once been simply Grandpa's land. The timber frame visitor center, built using sustainable materials and designed to blend into the landscape, stood where my grandfather's cabin had once been. The cabin itself had been carefully dismantled and reconstructed deeper in the property as my private retreat, but the public space would serve as a gateway to hiking trails, birdwatching platforms, and educational exhibits about the ecosystem. "This is exactly what this county needed," said Commissioner Elena Rodriguez, who had replaced one of Richard's former allies on the county board. "A way to celebrate our natural heritage while still bringing in tourism dollars. It's the best of both worlds." I had to smile at that. In the end, I had created something that served many of the economic goals Richard had claimed his development would achieve, but without destroying what made the land special in the first place. Visitors would stay in existing hotels in nearby towns, eat at local restaurants, hire local guides. The sanctuary would create jobs without paving over paradise. After the speeches and the ceremonial ribbon cutting, I found a quiet moment to walk down to the lakeshore alone. A simple granite bench had been placed there, engraved with my grandfather's favorite quote, "We do not inherit the earth from our ancestors. We borrow it from our children." As I sat there, I heard footsteps approaching. Turning, I was shocked to see my mother standing hesitantly at the edge of the clearing. "I didn't think you'd come," I said when I found my voice. She looked different, thinner, with gray showing in her hair that she no longer colored. "I wasn't sure I should, but when I saw the announcement in the paper, I wanted to see what you'd done with the place." "And what do you think?" I asked, genuinely curious. She gazed out over the water. "It's beautiful. Your grandfather would have loved it." She paused. "I know I have no right to ask, but is there any chance we could talk sometime?" "Really talk?" I studied her face, looking for signs of the manipulation I'd grown wary of, but all I saw was regret and a fragile hope. I don't know, Mom. There's a lot of damage to repair. I know, she said quietly. And I know some of it can't be repaired, but I'd like to try, if you're willing. I thought about it for a long moment. The pain of her betrayal hadn't disappeared, but it had dulled with time. And there was something to be said for second chances. I'd given one to this land, after all, helping it recover from the wounds inflicted on it. Maybe, I finally said. Not today, but maybe someday. She nodded, accepting the partial answer as more than she had a right to expect. As she turned to go, she paused. What you've built here, it's extraordinary, Alex. Your grandfather was right to trust you with his legacy. After she left, I remained on the bench, thinking about legacies and second chances and the complicated nature of forgiveness. The sun was setting over the lake, painting the water in shades of gold and pink, just as it had done for generations before any of us arrived, and as it would continue to do long after we were gone. In saving this place, I had changed too, become stronger, more confident in standing up for what I believed in. I had discovered reserves of courage I hadn't known I possessed, and learned painful lessons about trust and family. But I had also found new connections, new purpose, and a deeper appreciation for my grandfather's wisdom. The $1 million lawsuit and family exile that had resulted from my in-laws' greed had not been the end of the story, but rather the beginning of a new chapter. Not just for the land, but for me. And as I watched the sun sink below the tree line, I felt, for the first time in a long while, genuinely at peace with all of it. Whatever the future held, whether reconciliation with my mother or continued separation, whether new challenges to the sanctuary or years of quiet conservation work, I was ready to face it, grounded in the knowledge that I had honored my promise to my grandfather, and, in doing so, had discovered the kind of person I truly wanted to be. The evening breeze carried the scent of pine and lake water, familiar and comforting. In the growing darkness, a loon called across the water, a wild, haunting sound that seemed to echo the complex emotions of the day. I listened until the call faded into silence, then stood and made my way back toward the lights of the visitor center, where the celebration continued. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities. But for tonight, it was enough to know that this place, at least, was safe. A small victory in a world that too often prioritized profit over preservation. And sometimes, I had learned, those small victories were the ones that mattered most.